Welcome to another Orchestra Careers interview. I am Sonja Thoms, creator of orchestracareers.com, and today I'm joined by our content creator, Brianna Owens, who you met in the last interview, and if you haven't seen it, you can check out our YouTube channel. Brianna is a student at Middle Tennessee State University and wants to work for an orchestra someday. But our special guest is Chelsea Tanner, recently awarded doctorate, so Dr. Chelsea Tanner, and I'm so excited for her to join us today and share her story. I am so inspired by what Chelsea is doing for aspiring young musicians, and a little bit about her background, and then we'll dive right in. Chelsea is a flutist and a teacher. More recently, she's served on the faculties of Penn State University and SUNY Potsdam's Crane School of Music. Chelsea, welcome to our interview. So excited to dive right in. How are you doing today?
Good. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited for this conversation because we had a prep call and there's just such good stuff. So diving right in, one thing I wanted to mention about how I know you is that you and I are cousins. So I've had the benefit of knowing you my entire life. And so I'm just excited to share how with everybody just the evolution of your career and how you got to where you are. So we have to start at a little bit at the beginning, and I just wanted to ask, what role did music play growing up?
Well, pretty much everything. One could say it's like why I'm a person and I am alive, because both my parents met in an orchestra. They're both violinists in the Columbus Symphony. So music has been part of my life literally forever, and specifically classical and orchestral music. So there was just always someone playing the violin in the house. They both, taught privately as I was growing up, and I got to hear just countless symphony concerts, and it was a huge part of my upbringing.
So you started flute then at what age?
I was 11.
11.
Yeah.
And you got into high school. Where was the point at which you wanted to start pursuing music as a career?
Well, I was a pretty shy kid, as like you totally know that. I was sort of, not acknowledged very often because quiet kids don't get much attention. And I've sort of found a love for it because I think it was a way to express myself when words were not my strong suit. So I think in high school was really when it got competitive a little bit, and it was sort of like you were rewarded not just for like speaking out, but for playing well, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. So I would say probably sophomore year of high school is when I made the decision that I wanted to do some sort of music related career.
So then the next step was college. And tell me about that time of your life and what you were thinking about, what decisions you had to make.
Yeah, well, I wanted to double major in music ed and performance. I think I was very much actually more interested in the music ed side of things. And I ended up going to Ohio State. And I then, I took some trumpet methods and technique class, and I was like, I don't really want to teach the trumpet or any other instrument. And I kind of got to dive a lot deeper into flute repertoire and flute performing, and I love performing forever, and I don't know why, but it's just been sort of something that's always driven me, and I really found my love for that in undergrad, so I switched to only performance.
So only performance, and now you're hitting your senior year of undergrad. What were you thinking at that time about what's next?
Well, I'd gone to the Round Top Festival after my junior year of undergrad, and I think that really inspired me to get really serious about grad school in performance. And so I auditioned for 8 grad schools, and that was a lot. But I decided on Carnegie Mellon University to study with Jeannie Baxtresser, which was sort of like one of the highlight moments of my whole career thus far, is studying with her. So
So you had 2 years then in Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm.
And what was it like? I mean, I mean, at this point, you're like, okay, do I go on to more school? Do I take auditions? What were kind of the things you were wrestling with at that point with with respect to your career?
Right. So, Jeannie Backstresser is a notorious, I mean, she was principal flutist in New York Philharmonic. So you go there, you study excerpts, like that's sort of what the protocol is. And so I started taking auditions the second year of my master's, doing summer festivals in the summer. And I that was my track for a while. And so I think to just get a bit more experience, I decided to do an artist diploma at the University of Texas at Austin, studying with Marianne Gadigian, who's just a mentor and lifelong, inspiration to me also. So.
Okay, so all this time, are you still thinking, yes, I want to play in an orchestra one day. This is going to happen. I am gaining momentum. I mean, where is your kind of like, we're going to talk about mindset, but what was your mindset at this point?
Oh gosh, I think that it's very interesting because different teachers really, I think, have such an effect on us, right? I mean, Jeannie Backstresser was very meticulous and detail oriented. So I had 2 years of like wonderful, thoughtful preparation and just, such a solid foundation of like what it means to prepare for an audition, what you really need to think about for every single note. And I'm so thankful for that. And I went to UT Austin, and my experience there was very conceptual, very fundamental. So it was much less about specific details, but more about how is your body when you're playing? How, like, what is your setup like? And very detailed in terms of what I was doing physically, which is something, which is just a different experience overall. So there I'm like, do I know how to play the flute? I'm 24, like I have a master's, I should know this. So I think that's something that, isn't talked about too much, but there's always a learning curve, going from institution to institution, and you gain so much from having I've gained so much from having different experiences, and sort of now post instruction, sort of like marrying both ways of teaching and looking at things. And I mean, I think overall both of them have like the same agenda basically, right? But I think the teaching styles are very different, and I loved both of them. So I think it's really about in the moment it's very hard to see that though. I have to say. So yeah, I think that's one thing that I definitely struggled with auditions. And I think because I was rethinking so many fundamental aspects, which has really laid the foundation of my teaching in a lot of ways. So I'm so thankful for that. But through that, I think I was sort of discovering, how to approach things and different things. So I actually, I didn't advance in as many auditions the further I went along. So that was something that I didn't expect, but in the long run, I think was actually really helpful for me to grow as a musician, for sure.
You make such a good point that it's in the moment, you're a student, you're immersed, and you're trying to just, in a way you want to immerse in the technique and the style of your teacher. And I remember just like digesting everything and wanting to wholeheartedly try to assume like and put on the coat of whatever my teacher was telling me. And it's not till later that you realize you can make some decisions about what you've been taught and what you're going to hold on to and what you're going to kind of to make your own and to really come into your own as an artist. And I remember very distinctly talking about moving from teachers to teachers when it was in high school, but we were in Chicago and I was studying with Ray Still, which was a very like no structure to my lessons. Like he was like, what do you want to play for me today? And I'm like 14 and 15. And so it was just very conceptual, but incredibly, just deep in the artistry of playing. And then I went and we moved to LA and I started studying with Alan Vogel, who used to teach at USC and was in the LA Chamber Orchestra. And he puts down an etude book, the first lesson. And I'm like, oh, I have to like do all these finessing of crescendo and articulation and breath control. And I was like, I don't know how to play the oboe. But in the end, after 2 years, I realized that refinement was so necessary. And so I think if students I think there's absolute benefit to immersing in and just trying on everything your teacher is telling you. And then after a certain point, you can make a decision, and remembering that you can make a decision to keep on certain things and then also shed certain things. And it is a process and an evolution in your own artistry. So now you've been teaching for several years, and now you're seeing your students go through that process. And what is it that you really want them to understand about their own artistry and their education and life?
Well, I think one of the things that really challenged me at UT was to have opinions. My teacher was very adamant about making your own decisions based on the score, based on everything, like absorb everything you possibly can, or do your homework in a sense, and bring that into your lesson. So it wasn't like, oh, this is in process, I'm just going to bring it in, I have questions about this stuff. She's like, well, why didn't you try everything and then bring it in? So that was, it sounds a little extreme, but I've learned so much about what being prepared really means. Mm-hmm. And the advantages of having thought through literally everything, to be able to say, oh, I made this decision here, because it feels pretty awful to go into a lesson being like, oh, I never thought about that. And it sort of, it really expanded, just the ways in which I could take ownership of my own playing, because at the end of the day, you're the one on stage. It's not your teacher, right? So I think it was really helpful for me to have that notion of like, oh, I need to know why I'm playing this. I need to make decisions, and I need to really, give myself that agency, because I think I sort of did everything I was told, because that's what I love to do. I love rules. I love structure. So, that was a growth I definitely had in my years at UT. But for my students, I say the same thing. I sometimes even I'll be asked, was it good? And I'm like, you should know. I feel like I want them to have opinions. I want them to develop what they think a good flute sound is, what they think a full flute sound is, or just anything like that, or what's appropriate phrasing. Do they have a focal point to their phrase? Like what, different things like that, where I want them to sort of make decisions, and then we can talk about it, because they can sort of learn by noticing what I decide for them. But I think that takes a lot longer, because the depth of thought isn't as present a lot of times, because we sort of, in school, of course, we're just fed information, and it's like, remember it, okay, right? And then if they take that approach though to lessons, I feel like it's a disservice to themselves in a lot of ways, because it's not totally I guess the depth of thinking is not quite as present.
Well, it sounds like you really want to urge them to and set them up for what they're going to have to do someday anyway, which is when they leave school, is take ownership. I like that. Take ownership of their playing and take ownership of their artistry. And so are there what are some of the conversations? What do those conversations look like with your student when you're trying, you can see that they're almost there. They need to take that next step to really understanding that they have the power to take ownership over their playing. Is there any things that come to mind about certain experiences that you've had recently?
Yeah, so I think that, because I'm only a 1 year in a 1 year position right now, so they've had to transition from teacher to teacher, and it's a bit crazy. But I think that one thing, when I first started, it would just look up at me like a lost puppy a little bit, and be like, was it good? Did I do it? And I'm like, whoa, we need to, you should decide that in your practice room, right? You should ask yourself, at least, did I like this, right? So one of the things that I encourage my students to do is practice something. It could be a phrase, it could be anything very small, right? And ask themselves, like, do I really like this? Like, do I love the way I play this phrase? Because I think that if you can say, I really love how I play this, that's so exciting. And that's something they're going to want to share with people rather than, oh, I hope I do it right. Because if we go into a performance thinking, I hope I'm doing it right, that's so scary. I would be scared to death to go into a performance thinking, I hope I did it right.
Yeah.
Right? But we do rely on teachers a lot of times to tell us whether it's right or wrong. And I think that we're missing the whole point, right? If we're trying to grow as musicians, and practicing is just teaching yourself, right? So if we're just practicing to meet like a certain level of like what you think your teacher wants, which is something I had been guilty of in the past, and which is all made up in our head anyway. We're like, oh, I think they'll like that. Maybe I think I should do, you know what I mean? I think it's, we're sort of like missing the mark here, right? Like the point of building musicianship is building opinions, and the majority of them are going to be teachers. They're going to be band directors. So if they don't make decisions for themselves now, they're going to have to start in the job, and just making decisions on like what they want to the band to sound like. And I feel like that's something that they learn with their primary instrument most of the time. So
I want to bring Brianna in here for a second, because she is in the throes of, this, her own studies as a clarinetist. I went to her junior recital this spring, and so I know this is fresh in her mind, but I really like what you have to say about asking yourself questions. And I think it's very hard as a student, because you're so used to being told what to do. You do this, 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 and this. You're given the formulas, and then it should work, right? And so I think the transition and the evolution to becoming a professional is part of that is asking yourself those questions and valuing your own opinion and giving yourself permission to have an opinion. And that is so hard. And even as an adult who's been in my career for almost 15 years, there's times where I have to kind of break out of that mold for myself, because in my career, I think that I've had to just kind of do what's handed to me. And so sometimes I'm even stumped when I'm asked for my opinion. I'm like, wait, you actually want to know what I Sonja think? So it's a hard transition to do even now. But Brianna, okay, so you just had your junior clarinet recital, and so what are your thoughts about what you're hearing from Chelsea say about, forming kind of your own opinions and taking ownership over your own artistry? How does that resonate with you?
I think it's a very important thing as you're going through your college career to be able to honestly kind of let go of your teacher in a sense, because of course your teacher is one of your most important professors throughout your college career, especially if you're pursuing performance or just really serious about playing your instrument. They're such an important mentor to you. But I think you'll know if you worked with them well enough, if by the end of your college career you feel like you can go out and you don't need to call them every 5 minutes in your practice, or you don't have questions, or you're not in your practice thinking, well, I'll just wait till my lesson and see what they think. Because then you probably just didn't get as much out of it that you probably should have. I think that going out into the world is really important for you to hold your own on your instrument, whether you be a professional or not. And I definitely felt that at my junior recital. This was probably the first recital where I felt like I had my true ownership of it. And I knew maybe what my teacher would have liked. And of course I applied some of those things, but it's a really beautiful moment when you're in a lesson and you say, well, I know I played that how you would have liked it, but I did not like it that way. So I'm going to play it this way because this is my way. And you can kind of have that ownership.
Yeah, I think that also, though, I did everything my teacher said to a T. Or at least I tried my very best to, because I mean, I think though that I don't know if I would have made the decision to do my own thing in the moment, just because I want to get the full experience of what it would be like to play like them. Phenomenal players, all my teachers, you know. So I think it's an interesting line because we have sort of a trust and a relationship with our teachers to just to take what they say into account. And I think that also a good thing to mention is that once you get out of school and you have all of your, I'm a note taker, but I have all my lesson notes from Carnegie Mellon and UT and binders and things like that. And I made, you know, I look at some of those things now. I remember concepts that my teachers talked about, and I'm like, oh, that's what they meant. I could not hear that or did not hear that at the time, but you know, you'd be surprised by how much it comes back later. And I think that that's an important thing to remember too. And when you're in it, you're in it. It's like you can't have that perspective. Like you can kind of like observe what thoughts you're having in the moment, which I think is a really good tool to use, you know. If you're like, okay, this is the part where it's really stressful. And I told my students that yesterday. They're at the end of the road in the semester, and sometimes for me it's very helpful to zoom out a little bit and be like, oh, this is the part that's really stressful and really hard, right? We all have those like semesters that were just the hardest. For me, it was a year ago. And then I'm like, oh, that's the part that was really hard. And to have that sort of perspective and know that like you can get through it, or this is the part where, you know, if you have like a bad performance or you don't like how something goes, like, oh, this is the part where I just didn't have a good performance today, you know? Uh, and I think that takes us out of it in the moment, gives us a bit of relief, and we can sort of observe from there. But I think that, yeah, I think those are all really good things and perspectives to remember. And just, yeah, I think the more that students can explore and develop their own opinions and really make their opinions based in analysis and the score and different things, that I think that that's just so powerful.
So Chelsea, I mentioned that you've got a website. Everybody needs to check it out, chelseatanner.com. And you are very active on social, Instagram and Facebook. And what I've been loving is your Instagram live lectures. I'm going to use the word lecture. I don't know what you would use, but it's just an amazing way that an ability you have to kind of synthesize and draw out kind of all your experience and meet many people where they are, but your ability to kind of do that, to zoom out and then say, you know what, here's a bigger picture of things that you should be thinking about. One of the recent ones that I watched was Perfection Prevents Progress. And I just, that you spoke to my heart with that one. And that's something that you said, so many people are dealing with this idea that they think that they're perfectionists. And so I just was wondering, you know, everyone should definitely listen to that full lecture, and they can go to your Instagram page to do that. But how would you summarize kind of what you shared in that Perfection Prevents Progress?
Yeah, I think there were like a few main points. So we kind of wear perfectionism. I mean, it's rampant in the flute world, right? Like it's rampant. I mean, it's crazy. We're like, oh, it's gotta be perfect. It's gotta be perfect because everyone else is perfect. And we're told that, right? Like we're told like, oh, if you don't work the hardest you possibly can, someone else will, you know? Like we are always told that. And any instrument, if you're trying to win a job, that is what people say all the time, you know? And to a point, yes, I think that's true. I don't love the focus on other people, you know, or that should be the fuel as to why you need to be perfect, because then you're doing it for someone else. You know what I mean? I mean, whether it be if you know that person or they're some sort of like hypothetical amazing flutist, you know, something like that. I think that a lot of people, I think 98% of people I polled on my Instagram said that they were perfectionists, which is huge number. And I think that because we just need to be perfect and we just need to get it right, a lot of our micro, like smaller everyday practice room goals are external. So what I mean by that is like, you do things X amount of times and then it's perfect, then you really know it. Then you prove to yourself that you really know it, right? Or if you do things like 100 times or run your program twice every day just because, you know, some famous person said that's what works, right? You sort of get all of this input from other people and you're like, oh, if I do these things, right, like this is the formula and this is the result. So we want to be perfect. So I prepared for a competition this way a few years ago and it didn't go great. And I reflect on that a lot because I would just tally marks. I did it, you know, 10 times perfect, then it must be learned, right? I somehow left that for the tally marks to decide. And I didn't ask myself, does this feel comfortable in my fingers? Do I have sort of an RL expectation of what I want this to be? Am I utilizing that? I was not looking inward at all. I don't think I ever did, which is crazy, right? I mean, we think that that's an essential part, that everyone would do that, but I don't think that that's the case. And I think a lot of times that's the disconnect between the practice room and performance, right? Like if we are nervous and like our tally marks aren't on stage with us either, right? Like, so I think that part of that is just really asking yourself, like, does this feel comfortable? Maybe you don't need to do it 10 times and that's just sort of wasting repetitions, right? That's also something that's very possible. So I think that we get into this trap of like, oh, I did it perfect, I did it right, and I did it right. And then we go into this like right or wrong trap, right? And we're like, oh, I did it right, I did it wrong, oh, that was wrong, you know. And if we tell ourselves, it seems harmless to tell ourselves that was wrong, right? Like, but if you say that to someone else, like, oh, you're wrong, in that tone of voice, that stings a little bit, right? And we sort of discount how we talk to ourselves, even in those ways. So we perpetuate sort of like a negative self-talk, and then we try to make ourselves feel better by planning, right? Like this has been my experience. If I plan and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna practice for 4 hours a day and I'm gonna do it at this time, and I'm just gonna be like, it's gonna be so great, I'm gonna be such an accomplished flutist when I do this, and it's gonna be so awesome. We get this like little like hit of dopamine being like, oh my God, it's gonna be perfect, it's gonna be so great, because we've just spent an hour like making ourselves feel bad, right? And then we feel better by planning and doing all these other things. And you can see how, and I call those perfectionist fantasies. It's like, you know, when we do a new workout and we're like, oh, I'm gonna start on Monday, and then Wednesday we forgot, and we're like, oh, well, guess we gotta wait till next Monday to start over, you know. And meanwhile you're missing 4 days. And I think we do that with practicing and planning so much, and that really prevents us from saying like, okay, well, I had an hour, well, now I only have 20 minutes because something came up, and you know, better luck next, like tomorrow, you know. Whereas like you can really utilize 20 minutes, but because we didn't plan it, somehow it's no longer useful to us, right? If we're not doing the whole thing, a little doesn't count or something like that. I feel like that's where it really does prevent progress, right? Like that's the point in which we're losing out ultimately, because something is always exponentially better than nothing. So like getting your flute out for 5 minutes is exponentially more than not doing it at all, right? So I think that's sort of the general, you know, things that I talk about in there, but I think it's definitely something I've seen in so many students. So.
Well, I mean, memories came flooding back to where I was in a practice room in undergrad, and I'm like, well, I only put in an hour and a half. That's just not enough. But you know what? I'm hungry. I'm going to go. And just feeling like shame, you know, shame that I literally feel one of my observations of college is I just felt like I never practiced enough. And that was an underlying undercurrent all the time. It was never adequate in how much I was practicing. And who was setting the metric? I don't know. It just was this like artificial expectation that I was constantly comparing myself. And I think in the end, that may have contributed to why I chose not to go the performance path, because I knew that I was a good player and I felt good about my playing, but I just felt this intense weight of, okay, but this is going to be my life to win our orchestra job, was just like, and I didn't know that I had it in me. And maybe what I didn't have in me was the ability to tolerate that self-talk anymore. And I wouldn't have been able to articulate it that way then, but I think you're bringing to light kind of a lot of different things that I realize were kind of found like the foundation I had built for myself in my own practicing. So you say you're a mindset coach on your website, and I love this quote that you put. It says, "This is why I do what I do. I believe we need to be coached on our thoughts and our mindset, just like we need to be coached on our excerpts." And it is so refreshing to hear that, because I think that there's a real risk in what we do and what our young students are trying to do, is to think that all we need to be going to school for is to learn how to play our instrument. And I've felt for many years, and actually it's why one of the reasons I started Orchestra Careers is because there are so many skills that I needed that I didn't feel like I was focused on when I was in school. And I really feel that those 4 years of undergrad or those 2 years of masters are really times for us to be shepherded into the world. And it's so much more than learning how to play our excerpts. So I guess I'm curious, like, what are some of the other issues or topics that you deal with in your mindset coaching sessions?
Oh my gosh. It can, I mean, really applicable to everything, but I think that, a scarcity mindset is something that I probably going to do my next Instagram live about. I think that is, it kind of goes along with perfectionism and, always wondering if things are good enough. Is this enough? Am I enough? Am I doing this enough? Like, also, what is enough? Like, you know what I mean? Like, who decides that? Is there, like, do you get a letter from the universe? It's like, if you meet all these things, then you're good enough. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think it's something we don't really go deeper into. And I think that's really at the heart of so many things. And just, I think the root of most of what this is just like knowing that you have agency to decide what you believe. So I think that's one of the biggest things that like, I didn't really know that I could choose. I didn't know that I could, like, practice thoughts to really change my mindset, to really create things that I want in my life, or just to relieve myself of some sort of, or even just the belief that I mean, I've had for so long that I wasn't even really aware of, that I did a lot of soul searching this year about, was like, I truly believed that I was not good enough. I believe that. I've had a physical sensation when I thought it. It was a very interesting thing, because how could I have gotten a DMA thinking that I'm not good enough? I mean, we can survive in that mode, but like you said, I think to really thrive and to really live a life that you're extraordinarily, happy with, or a life that you would want, it's so important to get the other side of it, because I suppose we can shame ourselves, like you said, into winning a job, but it's not sustainable, I don't think. And I think it's not going to change once we get the job either, right? It's not like I've practiced shaming myself for 5 years. So, but once I get principal of whatever, it's going to go away and I'm going to think I'm awesome. You know what I mean? It's like, it's always the same. Every circumstance is just, it's not that different, but how we think about every circumstance is something that we have control over, actually. And I think that's one of the most powerful things. And that can be applied to performance anxiety, that can be applied to practice from self-talk, that can be applied to thoughts about you're rejected in an audition, you don't advance, you don't, or maybe you get to the finals and you don't get it, or like, those are really different experiences too. And what we make that mean is optional, right? We can make that mean, oh, I shouldn't have done this. Oh gosh, like, I never should have auditioned for this. Like, I knew I wasn't good enough. Or like, oh, well, they just don't like the way I play because my teacher was this person, or you know what I mean? It's really crazy. Or we can make it mean, oh, this needed to happen on the way for me to win my job, because if you have a belief that you're going to win an orchestra job, it doesn't matter how many auditions you take, you know it's going to happen. And if you go in with that mindset, this audition is just a stepping stone to your job, right? So I think it's one of those things that it can be applied to so many different things, but I think the root of it is really thought work and managing your mind in order to create results that you ultimately want and create feelings that you would ultimately want, because, you know, your thoughts do create your feelings. And, you know, just knowing that and spending some time with that knowledge and really pondering what is it that how do you want to feel when you take an audition? How do you want to feel when you are rejected? And sometimes we want to feel bad. Like, I've done that where I'm like, I just need to feel bad about this for like a day and then it'll be okay. But I make sure I see those feelings through. So I think it's, you can really have more control when you kind of take a step back and ponder these things that really do control everything, and, you know, taking responsibility for your thoughts and your feelings and how you're creating what your life is ultimately. So that was a long answer, but
No, that's great. And I think that what is so inspiring to me is that you're kind of accelerating this process for your students to trying to get them the fastest path to realizing that they have the power to make these decisions, that they have the ability to own their artistry. And it may be something that we just, you know, with time, we end up learning. But my goal is that our students, when they graduate, are better equipped than we were, you know. And I think that is where my heart is that there were things that I learned, but I learned the hard way. And it wasn't without like 6 different times of me hitting my head against the wall until I realized, oh, that's what I'm supposed to be learning from the situation. And if there's any, you know, I tell my students, like, trial and error is a very effective method. And I totally believe it. And there's some things in life that we just can't learn until we really fail, right? But if there's any service that we can provide to our students so that they are better equipped to join us, because I truly believe, like, your students, my students, Brianna is literally only months away from joining me in the industry. She graduates in December. And Brianna, I want to bring you into this and see what question you might have for Chelsea at this point. But like, I really truly see the value in these students learning sooner than I did how their voice matters. And so I see that they are going to be my colleague very soon. And I think the sooner my colleagues in the industry could realize that and really, you know, I guess invest even more in our students, the better our industry will be. And our industry is everything from performers to administrators to all kinds of different roles that I'm trying to also showcase on this channel. But I just love how you're kind of accelerating this process in a very holistic way. And it really seems that you have the heart to care for these students, that their whole person, their whole self is ready to go on to that next step. So Brianna, you've been listening in on this whole conversation. I was just wondering if you had any questions for Chelsea.
Yeah, I'm sure you've had several students this year who are kind of on this cusp between, well, do I really want to do performance or do I want to do something else? And it can be a really strange time. And sometimes students don't want to do performance anymore solely because they believe that they're not good enough. And then sometimes it's another reason, like another door opens up and that ends up being a better option for them. But for someone who is wanting to do performance but is at that crossroads of thinking, I'm not good enough, I don't have the time or capability to put into it to be good enough, what do I do now? What would you do for them?
I would point out that those are all optional thoughts, right? Like, if we go from the point, So if I were to ask you, why are you choosing to think you're not good enough? That kind of puts it on a different perspective, right? So just knowing that every thought that you think you can take responsibility for and you can change is super powerful. So what if, like, I would say, let's strip all of those thoughts away. What if you were successful in any given field, right? What if you had your dream performance career, and what if you had your dream administrative career, or whatever it might be, you know, and you got there? Like, what do you see yourself doing without all of that worry and without all of that I'm not good enough? Because if you think you're not good enough for one thing, it's gonna, it's gonna translate. I think it's much easier to think that we're not good enough to do performance because there are just math. There are so few jobs, right? And the competition is very high. So I would say all of those things, the I'm not good enough, that I don't think I can win, those are optional thoughts that if you chose to think a different thought and you believed it, or even just a neutral thought, right? Or just like, someone has to win the job, right? Like, that's a neutral thought everyone believes, because someone does win the job, usually, right? We all are, if we put ourselves in the mindset of someone who's won a job, right? And then we work backwards on how to get there. I feel like if you preface it with, I'm not good enough and I can't do this, and oh my gosh, this is too much. Of course, like, if you observe that from a third person perspective, right? Well, of course they feel stressed, right? Like, everyone's like, oh, no one wins the job anymore, right? Well, I mean, of course that would stress someone out if you look at your thoughts and sort of are like, oh, wow, no wonder she doesn't think she can do this. She has all this self-doubt. Like, of course. If a person had that much self-doubt and had this like laundry list of like why they weren't good enough, that you'd be like, oh, of course they're stressed out and they don't believe in themselves, right? So I think, once again, taking a step back and thinking, what do I want to do if I actually could do all of it, right? And I think that if you're going to choose not to do something, you should really like your reason. So like, if you don't want to be in an orchestra because you don't think you're good enough and there aren't that many, and or you're scared or you're nervous, like, I don't really like those reasons personally. But if you think, I don't think that's actually the job that I want, I don't know if that's the thing that's really going to fulfill me. And I don't know if I'm going to enjoy the pressures of playing in an orchestra every single day. Some people really do. Some people love it, and some people are, some people think, well, I don't know if I actually want that. But it's not because I don't think I'm good enough, right? So do you see the difference between those, right? So I think that just really liking your reason, but to go one way or the other, but just, I'm not good enough, or laundry list of the industry or external things, or like, oh, it's out of my control. I just can't. I mean, it's just like, it's hard, right? So I think just making sure that you really like your reason is really key.
That's great. And Chelsea, I think what I marvel at is your ability to kind of, it's kind of, you zoom out, you zoom in, you zoom out, zoom in. And we each have to gain the ability to ask ourselves, what do we think? But then also to say, okay, well, if I saw someone else doing this, what would I think about that? And so it's this kind of toggling between immerse and then detach, and immerse and detach. And you just have to be able to understand when the right time. And that's the hard part, is sometimes you need someone else to like break you out of it and say, okay, well, let's think about it this way. And that's your role as a teacher. And this is why I feel like I'm learning so much from you. And we're at little bit different life stages, but it's because, yes, oh, what a great reminder is that we have the power to zoom in and zoom out. And that is not something that will ever be, you know, not needed in life, is our ability to take care of our whole self, but also check ourselves a little bit and say, okay, is this really reasonable, rational, or is this really, you know, what would someone else think if I told them what I was thinking right now? So I just would love to keep this conversation going. There's so much to talk about. I just want to point people to your website again, and really they have to start following you, because their lives are going to be changed just like mine has been. But I was just wondering, what is next in the life of Chelsea Tanner? I know you've got a lot of things going on and a lot of things that you're building, and you have this incredible kind of brand that you've kind of been able to pull together. But what's next? What's next for Chelsea?
Yeah, so I am really just trying to build my mindset coaching business at this point. So I'm planning to move to New York City. That was in the works before this whole pandemic hit. So that's still the plan. I am starting a podcast that's to come out in June. It's called Musician's Mind, and it really just is aimed at giving tools to students or musicians of literally any age. I think anyone can take some value in what thought work can do for them, and you know, just giving musicians the tools in this perspective, because I so wish I had these tools. You know, when I was auditioning, I've taken 17 auditions. I think that it's so powerful, and so just something that the classical music industry really needs, in my opinion. And I think that it's just going to be not only, you know, part of my business, but just a passion project of just like, I want to get this message out there. And I'm also going to be starting a course this summer, an online course called Practice Room Empowerment. So that will consist of lectures on Zoom, one-on-one coachings every week, live coachings on Zoom as well, just so people can get perspectives from others. And it's aimed at music students, but really any musician of, I think, any age would benefit from it, because we all sort of deal with the same stuff, right? So yeah, that's called Practice Room Empowerment, and I'll be launching that probably you know, in mid-June or so. So something to look out for. Yeah.
Oh, that's fabulous. I love it. I love it. And so what's the best way for people to stay updated about when these things are happening? Is it to you know, follow you on social, or what's the best way for people to stay in touch with you?
Yeah, so I have an email list on my website, and I also have a free performance anxiety I guess you could get performance anxiety guide, and sort of talking through, you know, different ways to go about handling performance anxiety. That's a free guide on my website. You can sign up with your email and stay updated that way. And then mainly I'm on Instagram at Chelsea Tanner Flute, all one word.
Excellent. Well, so glad you could join us today. We're going to post this up on YouTube and make sure the links are out on all of our Orchestra Careers social, but appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us and share everything. Everybody needs to follow Chelsea because she's got great stuff coming out. And stay tuned for more interviews here on Orchestra Careers, and have a great day, everybody. Bye.